Hour number 3 tonight with Joel Skousen, the editor-in-chief of World Affairs Brief. Joel is with us a couple times a month as his schedule permits. He's very busy, and this is, of course, a very busy time. Hello, Joel. Thank you for being here, as always.
Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be with you, and there's a couple of momentous world affairs events to talk about this time.
Yeah, there are. One of the events which isn't being talked about, well, several aren't, was the right sector. I don't know how many battalions they pulled out of the no-conflict zone, the truce line, and they're sending them to Kiev. Kiev may be the venue for some pretty wild antics between the right sector and the Western dupes who are running the show.
Well, as I say, my point of view is that they're actually Russian plants posing as Western
Understand.
leaders.
Yeah. Gotcha. I use the term loosely. But,
and that's a very important concept, though, because, you see, everything that Kiev does seems to sabotage their own position.
Isn't that the truth?
It's as if they're out to lose the war. It's as if they're out to antagonize everyone and make the Russians look good. And if you were working for Russia behind the scenes and playing as if you're pro-Western, that's exactly what you would do.
That's true. All right. Which do you want to take first, Greece or Iran?
Let's start with Greece, and then we'll go to Iran, because,
Okay.
there's a couple of similarities here with these two things.
All right.
In both cases, they went kicking and screaming to the negotiating table, claiming hardline positions. We're not going to accept this. We're not going to accept that.
They did.
And the world is cheering them for standing up against the globalists, and then they cave completely and give in on almost all aspects. And,
did that surprise you? It did me. I thought they were going to go down with a fight. And I think it's probably pissed off, excuse my French, a lot of the Greek people.
Indeed, the Greek people are mad as hell. They think they've been sold a bill of goods. They elected Tsipras, who was a far-left candidate, almost of the Marxist variety, on the issue that we won't accept any of these austerity movements, that they've got to continue to help us or we're going to leave. And he even lobbied strongly to vote against the very things that he was forced to accept, and it's actually even worse. But because he made this ploy of refusing the original terms and then coming back to the table, he ends up paying $30 billion more. The bailout went from $50 billion to over $80 billion because of the fact that he lost the terms that he could have agreed to before by pulling this stunt about playing hardball.
Unreal. Wow. A $30 billion hit. Amazing. I didn't know that.
Well, what's interesting is that, I had always taken the position that the EU will do what it takes to keep Greece within. So important is the EU, the crown jewel of globalism right now.
Uh-huh.
They cannot afford to let it start to fall apart. And it would be a domino effect. If Greece left, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, and even France is not in a good position, couldn't be far behind. But so I expected, frankly, the globalists to make some concessions to keep Greece. I was even France was lobbying for, the IMF was lobbying for debt forgiveness.
Correct.
To the tune of about $30 billion, and
but not the Germans, Mrs. Merkel.
Not the Germans, who, and interestingly, France is just a bit behind the Germans. I published in the World Affairs Brief who owes what, or who's loaned what to Greece. Germany is at the top of the list, but France is right behind, only 10% less in terms of loans.
And they had a 180-degree opposite view. How interesting.
Yeah, and they were going to go for debt forgiveness, and I just couldn't figure out what's going on. You got a lot to lose with debt forgiveness, unless they wanted the Germans to take the whole hit, which I don't think the Germans would go for. But interestingly enough, the Germans and the others really played hardball with Tsipras and just said, he had claimed that, hey, I've got a line of credit from Russia, or China is willing to help as well. He really went to the negotiating table looking like could get something. But in the end, they called his bluff, and they said, you want to stay in the euro? You're going to give us everything we want, and he gave in on everything. Now he's got to sell this to the parliament, and the people feel absolutely betrayed. You told us no, and now you've acceded to all of these. The EU has agreed. But they've got them over a barrel. Banks have been closed now for over 2 weeks, and
they're supposed to open Thursday.
But people are desperate for money.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, the economy is really tanking quickly without the. I mean, they're dealing more in Bulgarian and Turkish money now because they can't get anything but about $60 a day.
Well, the finance minister, who just quit, said that they had a plan to bring the drachma back. They were talking Grexit. And it just never materialized.
Well, and it really. Brexit isn't a good choice for Greece, despite what people who say, thumb the nose at the globalists. The reason it isn't a good choice is that Greece is in such bad shape, their only recourse would have been high rates of inflation in order to pay for things with an inflated drachma. And so they would have had hyperinflation very soon, and that would have been a very, very bad scenario. Mm-hmm. So in reality, I think the majority of the people are going to say, bite the bullet, we need the money, we need to get back going. And in fact, now this is not a permanent solution, as you know, Jeff. They're too deep in debt to pay this stuff off. But it will give them breathing time. There will be a period of time where the economy will start to come back. And then it'll happen a little bit further down the road. And as I keep saying, I think the globalists know that ultimately when a big world war comes, everybody's going to forget about the indebtedness. It'll be war.
Oh, gone.
And they'll be able to inflate, do all kinds of shenanigans to write off debt and other things, and write off sovereign debt. I think the U.S. is going to write off their debt. I think most of the nations are going to write them off and start over again. Huh. And that's the new lease on life program that nobody is anticipating. That I think is their basic game plan, is wait till war gives us cover, write off all the debt, start over with a new world global government. We'll all rejoice.
Rejoice.
Yeah, alleviate from all this debt. We'll exchange it for worldwide control of finance.
Will the Greek people take this, or are they going to stand up and do something contrary?
I think the Greeks are going to bite the bullet and go along.
They just tired, you think? Remember, the quickest way to a man's will is through his stomach.
One of the reasons why I think they did shut down the banks and kept them shut down is the fact that, not only that they were running out of money, but to create the sufficient hardship. Remember that Tsipras had, even before he had this referendum, he had already telegraphed to the EU that he was going to accept their conditions. And then he pulled this referendum out of his hat, and it backfired on him. He ended up paying $30 billion more, but I'm just not sure. Look at it. When Hollande took over from Sarkozy, the so-called left wing took over the right. There was virtually no change. Continued right down the globalist agenda. And it really shows that whether you get left or right in any of these controlled governments, they all turn out to be globalists. And I don't know, Tsipras may be playing his people for fools.
I don't think his numbers are going to go up in the polls. No. On the contrary, the guy is may turn out to be one of the most hated men in modern Greek history.
Yeah, it may really backfire on him in terms of political ambition. And then again, if things start to turn around, all will be forgiven.
I don't know how they're not going to turn around, Joel. I don't see.
But what I'm just saying is temporarily.
The banksters won't allow it.
Influx of money. Yeah. I'm saying that things will go back to normal fairly quickly.
I see.
That's what I'm saying.
Understood. Yeah. Well, you have a good point there. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, Netanyahu says Israel is not bound under any circumstances to honor the agreement the Iranians made. I have a note here that says the Iranians, part of the deal was that they had to become intertwined with Western banksters. That was part of the deal. I can't prove it. I don't have chapter and verse. I got that from a good source.
Well, it's very possible. I mean, obviously, if you're going to get back the $180 billion that have been sanctioned and locked away by the Western banking system, you're going to have to sign on the dotted line. You're dealing with the Western banking system, and that's one of the big chokeholds they've got on someone like Greece leaving, is that they can actually boycott them and say, you can't deal with the Bank of International Settlement.
Right.
we don't honor your drafts. We won't honor the drachma. You go it alone with the BRICS or nothing at all. And so that's a pretty tough pill to swallow if most of your business.
That's a horse pill. Yeah.
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 It really is.
So what did the agreement? What does it really do? Do we know?
Yeah, we know exactly what it does. It sets Iran up for failure. It sets them up for a violation. And this is the point that I want to make up, is that here's the Wall Street Journal. This is a historic agreement, they say, over Iran's nuclear program. Barack Obama has effectively shredded foreign policy playbook that has guided the neoconservatives on the world stage for decades. In other words, we've played hardball, military power with the world, and suddenly this is a complete change. And I'm saying it is too good to be true. It isn't, as Barack Obama says, the champion of diplomacy. That's just taking credit for it. It, in fact, is one of the most carefully crafted deceptions, other than the phony fall of the Soviet Union, I've ever seen. And that is that we're going to play as if we're going to make a deal with peace. We're going to negotiate some hardball terms to guarantee that Iran can be found in violation at almost any time and justify an attack. And one of the proofs of this is a little-known clause that didn't make the press that I found out about today in one of, I think it was Sandy Berger, who's one of the major conspirators in globalism, along with Henry Kissinger. He's one of Henry Kissinger's right-hand men. And he said, inside this contract is a deal where Russia and China and Iran have both said that if there is a violation of sanctions, and remember this, this whole agreement's going before the UN Security Council and is going to be integrated as part of a UN Security Council resolution. And there's an automatic re-invoking of sanctions and a special provision that Russia and China have agreed that they will not use their veto powers to stop any retaliation against Iran. They cannot use their veto power to stop it once the West decides to retaliate against Iran for a violation. That is unheard of.
That's a surprise.
And why Russia and China would agree to that, to give up their veto power over
makes no
that.
sense. I don't get
but
it.
I'll tell you, to me, as I say, in the background of this thing, we have to remember the big change came when Syria was about ready to be attacked. Kerry made this London press conference mistake of giving Syria an out to get away from being attacked by the West by giving up their chemical weapons. And so the U.S. had to have an excuse to take Iran off the attack agenda as well, because basically the attack agenda on Iran was going to be preceded by an attack by Israel, and that's why Israel's still saying we're not obligated by this agreement. We can attack at any time.
Will they, Joel? Will they?
Not yet. As I say, Israel has demanded that the United States, as representative of the globalist world government, which was requiring Israel to attack Iran to start the war, and the U.S. would come in and help finish it. But Israel came back to the U.S. and said, you got to take out Syria before we attack Iran. And because the Syria thing has been now postponed, going on 2 years, in fact, the U.S. and British intelligence had to create ISIS just to have an excuse to get back into Syria.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. So,
good point.
What I'm saying is that this entire agreement started at the very time, right after that chemical weapons treaty, and to me, it was an indication that the U.S. was biding time, had an excuse, and what they're doing, not only do they have an excuse not to attack Iran, because we're in peace negotiations over this nuclear deal, but now we have an excuse to automatically go to war with Iran if we can find any violation. And this agreement is so tough, is so strict, that there's no way that Iran can get away with not violating it. And so I think it's a recipe for war, not peace.
No, and the punishment will be war.
That's right. And, what's interesting is, as I covered in the World Affairs Brief, there were 2 times that the United States falsified what they were agreeing with the Iranians with. In the initial talks, they basically said, we'll give you anything. You don't have to give up your nuclear program. You don't have to give up your centrifuges, nothing like this.
Yeah.
And when Iran and the United States announced that they were in negotiations, the U.S. announced a different line, a hard line, saying they were going to give up their nuclear program. And Iran said, no, we didn't agree to that at all. And here's the proof. We've got the recording of the conversation.
Total proof, yeah.
All right. So then the next time, which was back in February, April, when they had the interim agreement that was just passed, it was supposed to be finalized on June 30th, end of May. The U.S. once again came out and claimed that Iran had agreed to much more than they had. And now we find out in the final language, not only was the U.S. right, even though Iran didn't actually agree to it in May, somehow Iran got turned around and bought into much more, just like Cyprus bought into everything that the globalists were demanding. And here's what I think happened. I think basically the purpose of the U.S. coming into the negotiations initially and giving away everything, not even requiring tough things, and then doing the same thing in May was to lure Iran along, get them used to the expectations that, hey, we're going to have an agreement, we're going to get rid of these sanctions. We're finally going to be able to get ahead faster by getting all of our money and being able to sell oil and gas, and all the things they've been wanting to do. And all of a sudden now they've tucked into this agreement a 5-year moratorium on any new missiles, conventional weapons limitations. This is a total disarmament agreement. And,
how could the Iranians allow that to happen?
Well, apparently the U.S. and the globalists read it correctly, that they are desperate. The sanctions really
desperate for what?
Desperate for money.
The Iranians?
That's right.
All right. You see, we don't hear about that in the news. We don't hear that they're that desperate.
Well,
of course, they're putting on a good face, but still, I didn't know.
No,
it's that bad, huh?
Yeah,
wow.
Very desperate. It's holding up everything.
Wow.
So they basically figure, we, above all, will give away almost anything. We're going to cheat on it. We're going to give up almost anything because we got to get oil back of it. We need the billions. We need not only the 180 billions the U.S. has tied up in foreign bank accounts from Iran, but we need the over 100 billion a year in oil sales that they're capable of generating. And so this is a big deal to Iran. The globalists correctly read them. They gave them the hard line, and Iran accepted with the wink in the eye that they're going to cheat, and the U.S. is counting on that, in my opinion. They're going to spring the trap on Iran when Syria gets taken down.
So they're going to turn Netanyahu loose on them? Will that be it?
That's exactly right. They'll turn Netanyahu loose, and that's the whole reason the U.S. has been playing as if we're in opposition to Netanyahu, that we don't go along with Israel's hard line. The U.S. wants to create the crafty position that we're against war, we're for peace and diplomacy. So when Israel starts it, we'll have to get involved because they'll attack. Iran will retaliate against U.S. troops as well as Israel, and we have this alliance, etc. And we'll get into it reluctantly. It for once won't look like the globalist fault. But I think that's what the world is being set up for. And it'll result in a major Middle East war of horrendous proportions that will not, I repeat, not mushroom into World War III.
Will it spread into Ukraine?
No, I don't think so. I really don't. I think they're going to keep two separate issues. Russia will not come to the aid of Syria, and China and Russia will not come to the aid of Iran. They'll let it fall. It will help, build the reputation of the West as the bully of the world, which they need to proceed with a World War III scenario later on.
And in Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine will, continues to smolder. It's interesting that even though there's a lot of violations going on both sides, they keep stirring the pot, and Russia continues to increase arms supplies. Yeah. They're going to have another offensive at some point, but Putin's playing it pretty cool right now. He's basically at the peace table again with Iran. He's being viewed as a partner in this stuff, so he's not pushing in Ukraine, but it'll heat up again. And it's going to heat up in the Balkans, the Baltic states, probably next year. where they'll start to antagonize the Russians in those areas as well. And so I think we'll continue.
Which states are the worst in the Balkans?
In the Baltics?
Yeah.
Well,
which ones are likely to ignite?
Probably Lithuania.
Really?
Lithuania is the one that's right closest to Kaliningrad. And remember that the West allowed Russia to keep Kaliningrad.
Keep it. Yeah, it's like
the phony fall of the Soviet Union, so that they have this base military bristling with arms.
Well, it's like a province, but it's armed, very heavily armed.
Very heavily armed, and it's right on the border of Poland and Lithuania. And Lithuania is very upset about it. Lithuania is preparing and really beating the drum about a Russian invasion, so I should expect that it'll start there. But Estonia has really bad feelings with the Russians there. They're almost like a separate society. There's just hatred between them. Latvia isn't quite as bad, but it could be either Estonia or Lithuania, in my opinion.
Wow. Well, as you said, there's an awful lot going on, two very big things. It just seems like the pot is on high, and the water is boiling, and it's only going to boil over. And very soon, I don't see this going on.
Yeah, but you want to remember that this is a very deceptive pot. It is boiling, but the people are still asleep. People are being told that
I understand.
Put to sleep. Iran isn't,
I understand what you're saying. Good points, all of them, and you're probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. All right. If you'd like to get a free copy of Joel's really extraordinary newsletter of military and geopolitical analyses, World Affairs Brief, just write to him and ask. That's all you have to do. Write to editor@worldaffairsbrief.com and say, hey, I heard you on Jeff's program. Could you please send me a copy? And you'll get one. No charge. Take a look. All right, we'll be right back with more. Take a look at some of the idiocy in the campaign carousel here. It's spinning faster and faster with more loons on it all the time. Be right back with Joel after this.